the woman who could hear souls, and the Alpha King who wanted her dead. They called her cursed. A freak. The girl who could hear what no one should, the secret thoughts between human and beast, the lies hidden beneath every word. For 23 years, Leora Vance survived by making herself invisible, burying her wolf and her gifts so deep that even she forgot what power felt like. But when the Alpha King arrived in the northern ridge with blood in his eyes and war on his tongue, her silence shattered, because his wolf screamed one word she couldn't ignore: mine. Stay until the end to see how she goes from hunted to unstoppable. Like this video, drop a comment with your city, and let's begin. The northern ridge wasn't a place people came to thrive. It was where they came to disappear. Tucked against the jagged spine of the cold stone mountains, the settlement was barely more than a collection of weathered cabins, a crooked main hall, and a population that preferred silence over conversation. Harsh winters, thin soil, neighbors who kept their curtains drawn and their business to themselves. It was perfect for people who had something to hide, or something to forget. Leora Vance was both. She lived in the archives, a stone building that smelled like dust and old ink, where the pack's records had been kept for over a century. Birth logs, territory maps, treaties no one read anymore. It was quiet work, lonely work, the kind of job no one wanted, which made it perfect for someone no one wanted around. At 23, Leora had become an expert at being invisible. She dressed in muted grays and browns, kept her dark hair tied back in a severe knot, and moved through the settlement like a shadow, early to work, late to leave, never lingering long enough for anyone to remember she'd been there. She didn't attend pack gatherings, didn't volunteer for patrol duty, didn't shift, not in 6 years. Her wolf, the part of her that should have been wild and strong, was buried so deep inside her that sometimes Leora wondered if she'd imagined it entirely. She'd locked it away the same day she'd locked away her gift, the curse that had made her childhood a living nightmare. The ability to hear the inner voice of every shifter around her. Not thoughts exactly, something deeper. The silent conversation between human and beast. The truth that existed beneath words, the desires they hid, the rage they swallowed, the fear they denied. While others heard only what people said, Leora heard what they were, and people hated her for it. She'd been 5 years old the first time someone called her a freak. 7 when her own mother looked at her with fear instead of love. 13 when the pack elders decided she was too dangerous to train, too unstable to trust. By 16, she'd learned to bury the gift so thoroughly that even she couldn't access it anymore. Better to be nothing than to be feared. So she became a ghost, a name on a duty roster. The archivist no one spoke to, no one looked at, no one remembered. It had been working fine, until the Alpha King came to the northern ridge. Leora first heard about his arrival from the whispers that drifted through the open window of the archive hall. She'd been cataloging old patrol reports, her fingers smudged with ink, when the voices outside sharpened with urgency. Said he's bringing a full escort, hasn't visited the ridge in 15 years. Something about the human settlements pushing too close. Leora's hand stilled over the ledger. Alpha King Kale Draven. Even his name carried weight. Ruler of the Northern Territories, commander of the largest pack coalition in the region, a man whose reputation was built on ruthlessness and control. He didn't visit border settlements like the Ridge. He sent emissaries, orders, occasionally execution squads. If he was coming in person, something was very wrong. Leora told herself it didn't matter. Kings didn't notice archivists. She'd keep her head down, stay out of sight, and wait for him to leave. Simple. Except nothing in Leora's life had ever been simple. The Alpha King arrived 3 days later, just after dawn, with 20 wolves at his back and winter in his eyes. Leora watched from the shadowed corner of the archive's second-floor window as the convoy rolled into the settlement square. Black vehicles, armed guards, and at the center of it all, a man who moved like violence wrapped in skin. Kyle Draven. He stepped out of the lead vehicle and the temperature seemed to drop. Tall, easily 6'3", with the kind of build that came from a lifetime of combat, not a gym. Dark hair, severe features, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore black from head to toe, no insignia, no decoration. He didn't need it. Power radiated off him like heat from a furnace. Even from this distance, Leora felt the weight of his presence press against her chest. And then, without warning, her gift stirred. No. Leora stumbled backward from the window, her pulse spiking, her hands shaking. She hadn't felt the gift in years, had kept it locked down so tightly that she'd convinced herself it was gone. But now it uncoiled inside her like a serpent waking from hibernation, eager and vicious and hungry. Don't you dare. But it was too late. The voices crashed into her mind like a tidal wave. Dozens of them, hundreds, every shifter in the settlement, their inner selves a cacophony of noise, fear, pride, resentment, desire, rage. The guards outside were worried about the king's mood. The council members gathering in the main hall were calculating how to protect their own interests. The civilians watching from their windows were terrified of what his arrival meant. And beneath it all, cutting through the chaos like a blade, was his voice. Kyle Draven's wolf. Leora had never heard anything like it. Most inner voices were muddled, conflicted, half-formed thoughts struggling to surface. But his was clear, absolute. A command and a plea wrapped into one. Mine, mine, mine. Leora's knees gave out. She hit the floor hard, gasping, her vision swimming. The word echoed inside her skull, louder than her own heartbeat, louder than her own thoughts. It wasn't directed at anyone in particular. It was a declaration, a claim, a truth his wolf believed with every fiber of its being. And it was looking for her. No. No, this isn't happening. Leora shoved the gift back down with everything she had, slamming mental walls into place, choking it into silence. It fought her. God, it fought. But she'd had years of practice. Slowly, agonizingly, the voices faded. The pressure eased. The world stopped spinning. She sat on the dusty floor of the archive, shaking and sick, and realized with cold, creeping horror what had just happened. The Alpha King was her mate, and she was absolutely, completely screwed. Leora didn't leave this archive for 2 days. She told herself she was being practical. The king would be busy with council meetings, territory assessments, strategic planning. He wouldn't have time to notice a forgotten archivist. She just had to wait it out. Keep her distance. Let him finish his business and leave. It was a good plan. It lasted exactly 48 hours. On the 3rd day, a guard appeared at the archive door with a summons. Council meeting. Main hall. 1 hour. Attendance mandatory. Leora stared at him. I'm not on the council. Everyone with pack standing is required. The guard's expression was flat, bored. Alpha King's orders. He left before she could argue. Leora stood in the center of the archive, surrounded by centuries of records and dust, and felt the walls closing in. She could refuse, claim illness, disappear into the mountains and never come back. But refusing a direct order from the Alpha King was a death sentence. And running would only draw attention, the one thing she couldn't afford. She had no choice. 1 hour later, Leora slipped into the back row of the main hall, her heart hammering against her ribs. The hall was packed. Every council member, every senior pack member, every wolf with even a shred of authority had been summoned. Leora recognized most of them. Elder Torin, who'd called her unstable at 13. Patrol Captain Reese, who'd refused to let her train with the others. Counselor Marin, who'd suggested more than once that Leora should be exiled for the good of the pack. None of them looked at her. They never did. At the front of the room, seated at the head of the long council table, was Kyle Draven. Leora kept her eyes down, her breathing shallow, her mental walls locked tight. She wouldn't look at him, wouldn't give her gift a chance to surface. She'd sit through the meeting, stay silent, and get out. Let's begin. His voice cut through the room like a blade, deep, cold, utterly devoid of warmth. Leora's hands clenched in her lap. The human settlements along the eastern border have been expanding. Kale's tone was clipped, efficient. 3 new towns in the last year. Logging operations pushing into protected territory, hunting parties venturing closer to our lands every month. This isn't accidental encroachment, it's coordinated. Murmurs rippled through the room. Elder Torin leaned forward, his weathered face creased with worry. Coordinated by whom? That's what I'm here to find out. Kale's gaze swept the room, sharp and assessing. Someone is feeding them information, Territory maps, patrol schedules, safe routes through our lands. Silence. Then Counselor Marin spoke, her voice tight. You're suggesting we have a traitor. I'm not suggesting anything, Kael said coldly. I'm stating a fact, and I'm going to find them. The room erupted into chaos. Denials, accusations, demands for proof. Leora pressed herself further into her chair, trying to disappear into the background. But then Kael's eyes found her. It was barely a glance, a flicker of attention as his gaze swept across the back row. But the moment their eyes met, Leora's gift slammed into her like a freight train. Mine! The word roared through her mind, obliterating every defense she'd built. And this time, it wasn't just his wolf. It was him. Kael Draven, the man beneath the crown, the soul beneath the authority, raw and desperate and utterly certain. She's here. I found her. Mine. Don't let her leave. Leora jerked her gaze away, her pulse thundering, her skin going cold. Across the room, Kael had gone perfectly still. His expression hadn't changed, still cold, still controlled, but something in the air had shifted. He knew. He didn't know who she was, didn't know her name, her face, her history, but his wolf had recognized the bond the same moment hers had, and now he was searching the room with predatory focus, trying to isolate the source of the pull. Leora didn't wait to see if he'd succeed. The moment the meeting adjourned, the moment the council members began to rise and shuffle toward the doors, she bolted. She made it halfway across the settlement square before a hand closed around her arm. Leora spun, her heart in her throat, expecting to see Kael Draven's cold eyes staring down at her. Instead, she found Captain Reese. Easy, he said, his grip firm but not painful. You looked like you were about to pass out in there. You all right? Leora forced herself to breathe, forced herself to meet his eyes. I'm fine. Reese studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He was a hard man, scarred, cynical, the kind of wolf who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. But he'd never been cruel to her, just distant, like everyone else. You should go home, he said finally, releasing her arm. King's got everyone on edge. Best to stay out of the way. Leora nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and turned to leave. Leora. She froze. Reese hesitated, then said quietly, If you see anything strange, anything that doesn't feel right, you tell me. Understand? She looked back at him, surprised. Why? Because you're the only one in this damn settlement who actually looks at things. He gave her a thin smile. Even if you pretend not to. Before she could respond, he walked away, leaving her standing alone in the square. Down. Leora didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the small cabin behind the archive, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The bond was real, undeniable, and if Kael's wolf had recognized it, it was only a matter of time before he tracked her down. What would he do when he found her? Claim her? Reject her? Use her gift for his own purposes? Or worse, what if he discovered what she could do and decided she was too dangerous to live? Leora rolled onto her side, pulling the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. She'd spent her whole life hiding from people who feared her. Now she was hiding from a man whose wolf wanted her, and whose human side would probably kill her the moment he learned the truth. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, cold and lonely. And somewhere in the darkness, Leora swore she heard a wolf's distant howl, low and searching and heartbreakingly familiar. She closed her eyes and prayed for dawn. The next morning, Leora arrived at the archive before sunrise and buried herself in work. She pulled every record related to the eastern border, cross-referenced patrol logs, and mapped out human settlement patterns for the last decade. If she kept busy, she wouldn't think. If she didn't think, she wouldn't panic. It almost worked. Until Counselor Marin walked through the door. Miss Vance? Leora looked up from the map she'd been studying, her stomach sinking. Marin was a tall, sharp-featured woman with ice-blonde hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. She'd been on the council for 15 years and had made her disdain for Leora abundantly clear from the beginning. Counselor, Leora kept her voice neutral. What can I do for you? Marin's smile widened. The Alpha King has requested access to our historical records. Border treaties, land agreements, anything relevant to the current situation. She paused. I told him you'd have everything ready by this afternoon. Leora's pulse stuttered. He's coming here? Is that a problem? Yes. Yes, it's a massive problem. No, Leora said carefully. I'll have the documents prepared. Good. Marin's gaze swept over the cluttered archive with barely concealed disgust. Do try to make the place presentable. We wouldn't want the king to think we're disorganized. She left in a swirl of expensive perfume and condescension. Leora stood frozen for a full minute, her mind screaming. Then she got to work. K.L. Draven arrived at the archive at exactly 2 in the afternoon, flanked by 2 guards, and radiating the kind of cold authority that made the air feel heavier. Leora had spent the last 4 hours preparing. She'd pulled every relevant document, organized them by date and category, and arranged them on the main table in neat stacks. She'd cleaned the worst of the dust from the windows, swept the floor, and tried very hard not to have a complete breakdown. Now, as the Alpha King stepped through the door, she realized none of it mattered. Because the moment he entered the room, her gift exploded to life. Her. It's her. Finally. Leora's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, and forced herself to stay upright. Kael's wolf was loud, louder than anything she'd ever heard, a presence so overwhelming it drowned out everything else. Don't let her run. Keep her close. Mine. But when Leora finally looked up, Kael's expression was utterly blank. He stood in the center of the archive, his cold gray eyes scanning the room with clinical detachment. If he felt the bond, he showed no sign of it. No recognition. No reaction. Just the same icy control he'd shown in the council meeting. Miss Vance. His voice sent a shiver down her spine. Deep, rough. The kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to command attention. Your Majesty. Leora's voice came out steadier than she'd expected. I've prepared the documents you requested. Kael's gaze shifted to the table, then back to her. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his eyes, but it was gone before she could name it. Show me. Leora gestured to the nearest stack. These are the original border treaties from 1847. This section covers land disputes with human settlements between 1920 and 1950. And this, she pulled out a leather-bound ledger, is a record of every official contact between our pack and human authorities for the last 75 years. Kyle moved to the table, his presence overwhelming in the small space. He picked up the ledger, flipping through it with practiced efficiency. Leora watched his hands, large, scarred, the hands of a fighter, and tried not to think about what his wolf was screaming inside her head. She's perfect, strong, mine. Don't let her leave. Who handled these records before you? Kyle asked, not looking up. Elder Corin. He passed 6 years ago. And since then? Just me. Kael's eyes flicked to hers, sharp and assessing. You've been doing this alone for 6 years. It wasn't a question, but Leora nodded anyway. How old are you? 23. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. You've been maintaining the pack's entire historical archive since you were 17. Yes. Why? The question caught her off guard. Someone had to. That's not an answer. Leora's jaw tightened. It's the only one I have. For a long moment, Kael just looked at her. Really looked at her, in a way that made her feel exposed, like he could see through every wall she'd built. His wolf was howling inside her mind, desperate and possessive, but his face remained a mask of cold indifference. Then he turned back to the documents. I'll need copies of these. Can you manage that? Yes. Good. Have them ready by tomorrow morning. He left without another word, his guards falling into step behind him. Leora waited until the door closed. Then she sank into the nearest chair and pressed her shaking hands against her face. This was going to kill her. Leora spent the next 18 hours making copies she didn't sleep through. Her hands cramped from writing, her eyes burned from squinting at faded ink by lamplight. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because if she stopped working, she'd have to think about what was happening, and thinking about it would break her. The bond was getting worse. Every time Kael came near the archive, which he did, twice more that day, asking pointed questions about territorial markers and treaty loopholes. Leora felt it like a physical pull. Her wolf, dormant for 6 years, was clawing at her insides, desperate to surface. And his voice, that relentless inner howl of mine, 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 was becoming impossible to block out. By dawn, she had the copies ready. By mid-morning, she'd delivered them to the main hall, left them with a guard, and fled back to the archive before anyone could ask questions. It bought her exactly 3 hours of peace. Then Captain Reese showed up with news that made her blood run cold. "King wants you at the afternoon briefing," he said, leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed. "Council chambers, 2 o'clock. Leora looked up from the map she'd been pretending to study. "Why?" "Didn't say. Just added your name to the attendance list." Reese's expression was unreadable. "You piss someone off." "Try everyone." "Not that I know of," Leora said carefully. "Well, you're on his radar now." Reese pushed off the doorframe. "Word of advice? Don't try to hide in the back this time. He notices that kind of thing." He left before she could ask what he meant. Leora sat in the empty archive, surrounded by centuries of pack history, and felt the walls closing in tighter. The council chambers were smaller than the main hall, just a single round table, 10 chairs, and a tension so thick Leora could taste it. She arrived exactly on time, took the only empty seat remaining, and immediately regretted every decision that had led her to this moment, because the empty seat was directly across from Kyle Draven. "Miss Vance," his voice cut through the low murmur of conversation. "Good of you to join us." Leora forced herself to meet his eyes. Big mistake. The moment their gazes locked, his wolf surged forward in her mind, so loud and desperate she nearly gasped. "There. Finally. Don't look away. Stay. Please stay." But Kael's expression remained perfectly neutral, cold, analytical, giving away nothing. He gestured to the stack of documents she'd copied. "Your work is thorough. Councillor Marin mentioned you've been cross-referencing these against current patrol routes." It wasn't a question, but Leora nodded anyway. "The human settlements have been expanding along the same corridors mentioned in the 1920 disputes. I thought it might be relevant." "It is." Kael's gaze didn't waver. "Which is why you're here. I want you to map out every historical point of contact between our territory and human settlements for the last century. Mark the patterns. Show me where they're likely to push next." Councillor Marin leaned forward, her smile sharp. "Your Majesty, surely we have scouts for that kind of—" "Your scouts missed the pattern entirely," Kael said flatly. "Miss Vance found it in 18 hours. She stays." Marin's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Leora felt the weight of a dozen hostile stares pressing down on her. Elder Torin looked suspicious. Patrol Captain Reese looked concerned. The other council members, wolves she barely knew by name, looked like they'd just watched a stranger get invited to a private family dinner. And across the table, Kyle Draven looked like a man who'd just made a strategic decision and didn't give a damn who it upset. "Now," he said, his voice cutting through the tension, "let's talk about the real problem." He pulled out a hand-drawn map and spread it across the table. Leora recognized it immediately. The eastern border, marked with red circles indicating human settlements. 3 new towns in 12 months, Kyle said. All built within a mile of our territorial markers, all positioned along natural game routes and water sources. He tapped one of the circles. This one broke ground exactly 2 weeks after we shifted our patrol schedule. This one, another tap, was established 3 days after a council meeting where we discussed pulling back from the northern ridge. Silence. Elder Torin cleared his throat. "That could be coincidence." "Could be," Kael agreed. Kael. "Except this morning, I received a report that a human hunting party was spotted half a mile inside our border. They had a map. A detailed hand-drawn map showing the location of our safe houses, water sources, and patrol shelters." He let that sink in. "Someone is feeding them information, and I'm going to find out who." The room erupted. "This is absurd. You're accusing one of us?" "We've served this pack for decades." Kyle didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The sheer force of his presence was enough to shut everyone up. "I'm not accusing anyone," he said coldly. "Yet. But until I know who the traitor is, everyone in this room is a suspect. That includes council members, patrol captains, and anyone with access to sensitive information. His gaze swept the table. No one leaves the settlement without my permission. No one communicates with outsiders. And if I find out someone's been lying to me... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Leora sat frozen in her chair, her mind racing. A traitor. Someone in this room, or close to it, was selling out their own pack. And Kael had just painted a target on everyone's back, including hers. Across the table, his wolf was still howling. Keep her safe. Watch her. Don't let anyone hurt her. But Kael's face remained a mask of ice. What? The meeting lasted another hour. Kael assigned tasks, increased patrols, restricted access to sensitive documents, background checks on anyone who'd had contact with human settlements in the last 6 months. Leora was assigned to compile a comprehensive timeline of every leak, cross-referenced with who had access to the information at the time. It was busy work, punishment disguised as responsibility. A way to keep her under scrutiny while making sure she couldn't cause trouble. Leora knew exactly what it was, and she had no choice but to accept it. When the meeting finally adjourned, she tried to slip out quickly, but Counselor Marin blocked her path, her smile cold and sharp. A word, Miss Vance. Leora stopped, her stomach sinking. Counselor. Marin waited until the others had filed out, leaving just the two of them in the empty chamber. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice to something that might have sounded friendly if it weren't laced with venom. I don't know what game you're playing, Marin said softly, but you need to be very careful. The king may find your little archive useful right now, but the moment you become a liability... She smiled. Well, we both know how this pack deals with liabilities. Leora forced herself to hold the woman's gaze. I'm just doing my job. Are you? Marin tilted her head. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to make yourself indispensable, trying to climb above your station. Her eyes glittered. That's dangerous, Leora. Especially for someone like you. Someone like you. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Broken. Cursed. Unwanted. Leora's hands clenched at her sides. If that's all, Counselor... One more thing. Marin's voice dropped even lower. Stay away from the king. Whatever pathetic little fantasy you've built in that strange head of yours, it ends now. You are nothing. You will always be nothing. And if you forget that... Counselor Marin. Both women spun around. Kael stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. How long he'd been there, Leora had no idea, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Your Majesty. Marin's smile was instant, practiced. I was just... leaving, Kael said flatly. Now. For a moment, Marin looked like she might argue. Then she inclined her head, shot Leora one last venomous look, and swept out of the room. Silence fell. Kael didn't move from the doorway. Leora didn't move from where she stood. The space between them felt charged, dangerous, like the air before a lightning strike. Miss Vance, Leora swallowed. Your Majesty. How much of that did you believe? The question caught her off guard. What? Marin's little speech. Kael's eyes were sharp, assessing. How much of it do you actually believe? Leora's throat tightened. Does it matter? Answer the question. She wanted to lie, wanted to brush it off, play it safe, keep her walls up. But something in his gaze, something that had nothing to do with the bond or his wolf or the desperate howling in her mind, made her tell the truth. Most of it, she said quietly. Kael's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. Then you're a fool. Leora blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. He stepped into the room, closing the distance between them with predatory grace. You've kept this entire archive running by yourself for 6 years. You identified a pattern my scouts missed. You're smart, capable, and clearly underestimated by everyone around you. He stopped an arm's length away. So why the hell do you let people like Marin convince you you're worthless? Leora's pulse hammered in her throat. This close, she could feel the pull of the bond like a physical force, dragging her toward him. His wolf was screaming in her mind, so close, finally, don't let her go. But Kael himself seemed utterly unaffected. Because she's right, Leora said, hating how small her voice sounded. I am nothing. I've always been nothing. That's not true. You don't know me. I know enough. You don't. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. You don't know what I am, what I can do, what I've done to survive this long. Kael's eyes narrowed. Then tell me. No. Why not? Because... Leora's voice cracked. She took a breath, forced herself to steady. Because if I do, you'll either use me or kill me, and I'm not interested in either option. For a long moment, Kael just looked at her. His wolf was howling, desperate and possessive, but the man himself was silent, calculating. And then, quietly, he said, I'm not going to kill you, Leora. It was the first time he'd used her first name. The sound of it in his voice, rough, deliberate, sent a shiver down her spine. You don't know that, she whispered. Yes, Kael said. I do. He turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the empty chamber with her racing heart and the echo of his wolf's desperate cry still ringing in her ears. Leora didn't sleep that night either. She lay in her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over. I'm not going to kill you. What did that mean? That he knew about the bond? That he'd figured out she was his mate and decided to keep her alive out of some twisted sense of obligation? Or worse, that he suspected what she could do and wanted to use her? Either way, she was trapped. She thought about running, packing what little she owned and disappearing into the mountains, finding some remote human settlement where no one knew her name or her past. But that would only confirm everyone's worst suspicions about her. And if Kael really was looking for a traitor, running would make her the prime suspect. No, she had to stay. Had to keep her head down, finish the work he'd assigned, and pray he lost interest before the bond drove her completely insane. It was a terrible plan. It was the only plan she had. The next 3 days passed in a blur of mounting tension and increasing paranoia. Kael's investigation intensified. Guards were posted at every major building. Patrols doubled. Council meetings became daily interrogations, with Kael dissecting every decision made in the last 6 months, looking for inconsistencies. And Leora, trapped in the middle of it all, compiled her timeline. She worked late into the night, cross-referencing dates and events, tracking who had access to what information and when. It was exhausting, meticulous work, and it was starting to reveal patterns she didn't like. 3 of the leaks had occurred within 24 hours of closed council sessions. 2 more had happened right after private meetings between Elder Torrin and Patrol Captain Reese. And one, the most damaging one, the map showing their safe houses, had been leaked less than a week after Councillor Marin had requested access to historical border records. Leora sat back in her chair, staring at the timeline spread across her desk, and felt her stomach twist. Someone on the council was the traitor, maybe more than one, and she had no idea what to do about it. She couldn't go to Kael, not directly. He'd want proof, and all she had were patterns and suspicions. And if she was wrong, if she accused someone without solid evidence, she'd be the one who ended up dead. But if she stayed silent and more people got hurt... Leora pressed her hands against her face, her mind spinning. A knock on the archive door made her jump. "It's open!" she called, hastily covering the timeline with a blank ledger. Captain Reese stepped inside, looking tired and grim. "Working late again?" "Always." Leora forced a smile. "What can I do for you, Captain?" Reese closed the door behind him. The click of the latch felt ominous. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." Leora's pulse spiked. "All right." "The King's been asking questions. About you." Reese leaned against the door, his expression unreadable. "About your history, why you don't shift, why you've been working alone for so long." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you keep to yourself, that you've never caused trouble." He paused. "But he's not satisfied with that. He thinks you're hiding something." Leora's mouth went dry. "What do you think?" "I think everyone in this settlement is hiding something," Reese said quietly. "The question is whether what you're hiding is going to get people killed." She wanted to lie, wanted to deflect, change the subject, make him leave. But Reese had been one of the few people who'd never treated her with outright cruelty. Distant, yes. Wary, yes. But never cruel. "I'm not the traitor," she said. "If that's what you're asking." "That's not what I'm asking. Reese pushed off the door, moving closer. I'm asking if you know who is. Leora's breath caught. What? You're smart, Leora. Smarter than you let on. You've been compiling that timeline for 3 days, cross-referencing everything. He nodded toward the covered ledger. You found something, haven't you? She could deny it, should deny it. But the weight of the secret was crushing her, and Reese was looking at her like he might actually believe her if she told the truth. Patterns, she said finally. Connections. Nothing concrete. Show me. Leora hesitated. Then slowly, she pulled the blank ledger aside, revealing the timeline beneath. Reese studied it in silence, his jaw tightening with each passing second. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim. You're saying it's someone on the council. I'm saying the leaks correlate with council activity. That's all I know. That's enough to get you killed if you're wrong. Reese met her eyes. Or if you're right and they find out you know. I know. So what are you going to do about it? Leora looked down at the timeline, at the damning patterns she'd uncovered, and felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. I don't know. Well, you better figure it out fast, Reese said quietly, because the king's running out of patience, and when he decides to make a move, he shook his head. People are going to die. He left without another word. Leora sat alone in the archive, surrounded by evidence she couldn't prove and suspicions she couldn't voice, and realized she was completely, utterly alone. Except for the bond. Except for the mate she couldn't claim, and the wolf that wouldn't stop screaming his name. The breaking point came 2 days later. Leora was in the archive, trying to find concrete proof to support her suspicions, when the alarm bells started ringing. The sound was unmistakable. 3 short bursts, repeated over and over. Intrusion, hostiles on Packland. She dropped the ledger she'd been reading and ran outside. The settlement square was chaos. Wolves were shifting, grabbing weapons, shouting orders. Kale stood at the center of it all, fully armored, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. Perimeter breach on the eastern ridge. Human hunting party, 20 strong, armed with silver. His eyes swept the crowd. Full combat teams now. Reese, take the north flank, Torrin south. I'll handle the center. Leora pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding. Eastern Ridge. That was where the timeline had predicted the next incursion. She'd written it down just last night, a correlation between lunar phases and human activity patterns. She'd been right, and she hadn't told anyone. Kale's gaze found hers across the square. For one brief second, his wolf surged forward in her mind. Stay safe, don't follow, wait for me, but his expression remained cold and focused. Miss Vance, archive, now. Lock the doors and don't open them for anyone but me. It was an order, a clear, direct command. Leora turned and ran back to the archive, but she didn't lock the doors, because as the sound of running feet and battle cries faded into the distance, a thought crystallized in her mind with cold, horrifying clarity. This was a distraction. The human hunting party wasn't the real threat. It was a diversion, and while everyone, including Kyle, was focused on the eastern ridge, the real traitor was making their move. Leora stood in the empty archive, her hands shaking, her wolf clawing at her insides, and made a choice. She grabbed the timeline, stuffed it into her jacket, and slipped out the back door. If she was wrong, she'd be exiled, or worse. If she was right, she might save them all. Either way, she was done hiding. But the council chambers were supposed to be empty. They weren't. Leora crept through the back entrance, her footsteps silent on the stone floor, and heard voices coming from the main room. Low, urgent, careful. She pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing, and listened. Confirmed the exchange point. 3 miles north of the ridge, midnight tomorrow. That was Counselor Marin. And the payment? A second voice. Male. Unfamiliar. Half now, half when the map is delivered. Leora's blood ran cold. You're sure they won't trace it back to us? Positive. The king's too busy chasing shadows. By the time he realizes what's happened, we'll be long gone. Marin's voice was smooth, confident. The human settlements will have everything they need to push into the heartland. The northern ridge will fall within a year. And the king? Will be too late to stop it. Footsteps, coming closer. Leora turned to run and slammed directly into a body. She looked up, her heart stopping, and found herself face to face with Elder Torin. His expression was cold, final. "Well," he said quietly, "this is unfortunate." He grabbed her arm in an iron grip, his other hand clamping over her mouth before she could scream. And from inside the chamber, Counselor Marin's voice drifted out, sharp and satisfied. "Bring her in." Torin dragged Leora into the chamber like she weighed nothing. She tried to fight, kicked, twisted, drove her elbow backward into his ribs, but the old wolf was stronger than he looked. His hand stayed clamped over her mouth, cutting off her air, and when he shoved her into a chair in the center of the room, the impact knocked the wind from her lungs. Counselor Marin stood by the window, her arms crossed, looking pleased. "I told you she'd be a problem." The unfamiliar man, tall, lean, with the kind of face that belonged in shadows, pulled a knife from his belt. Not silver, just steel, but sharp enough to make Leora's stomach drop. "She heard everything," Torin said flatly, releasing her. "What do you want to do with her?" Marin tilted her head, studying Leora like she was an insect pinned to a board. "The same thing we should have done years ago. Get rid of her." Leora's hands were shaking. Her breath came in short, painful gasps. But her mind was racing, calculating, trying to find a way out of this room that didn't end with her throat cut. "You won't get away with this," she said, hating how hoarse her voice sounded. "Kyle will know. He'll figure it out." Marin laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "The king is currently chasing down a hunting party we paid to create a diversion. By the time he realizes what's happened, we'll be across the border with enough money to start over. And you'll be just another casualty of the conflict. People will ask questions. People won't care." Marin stepped closer, her smile sharpening. "You're the freak who never shifts, the girl everyone's afraid of, the archivist nobody talks to. You could disappear tomorrow, and the only thing anyone would feel is relief." The words hit harder than they should have, because they were true. Leora had spent 6 years making herself invisible, convincing everyone she didn't matter, and now that invisibility was going to get her killed. "Why?" Leora asked quietly. "Why betray your own pack?" "Because this pack is dying," Marin said. "The king's obsessed with holding territory we can't defend. The humans are coming whether we like it or not. Better to profit from the inevitable than go down with a sinking ship." She gestured to Torin. "Some of us are smart enough to see that." Torin's expression was unreadable, but he didn't argue. The stranger stepped forward, twirling the knife between his fingers. "Do we kill her here or take her somewhere quiet?" "Here's fine," Marin said. "Make it quick. We don't have much time." Leora's wolf surged inside her, 6 years of forced dormancy exploding into sudden, desperate life. She felt it rising, clawing, demanding to be set free, but she shoved it down, hard, because shifting now would only prove she'd been lying all along. And if she was going to die, she wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. The stranger moved closer, raising the knife. Leora closed her eyes, and her gift tore open like a dam breaking. The voices crashed into her mind all at once. Marin's cold satisfaction, Torin's bitter resignation, the stranger's predatory anticipation. But beneath it all, cutting through the noise like a scream, was something else. The bond. Kale's wolf, howling in her mind with raw, animal terror. Danger. "She's in danger! Go back! Now!" Leora's eyes snapped open. The stranger was 2 steps away, the knife glinting in the lamplight. She had maybe 3 seconds before the blade found her throat. She didn't think, didn't plan, just acted. Leora threw herself sideways out of the chair, hitting the floor hard, and screamed, not with her voice, but with her mind. A psychic cry sent straight down the bond, raw and desperate, and loud enough to shatter every mental wall she'd built. "Help me!" The stranger lunged. The knife came down, and the door exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood. Kale Draven moved like death in motion. 1 second the doorway was empty. The next, he was inside, his eyes blazing gold, his entire body radiating violence. He hit the stranger with enough force to send the man crashing into the wall, then ripped the knife from his hand and drove it into his shoulder in one fluid motion. The stranger screamed. Kyle didn't stop. He grabbed the man by the throat, lifted him off the ground, and slammed him into the stone floor hard enough to crack bone. "Who sent you?" "Kyle." Marin's voice was sharp, desperate. "This isn't what it looks like." Kale's head turned toward her, slow and deliberate. The look on his face was beyond rage. It was something colder, something final. "Don't! Move!" Marin froze. Torin made a break for the back door. He didn't make it 3 steps before Kale was on him, moving faster than any human had a right to move. He caught the old wolf by the collar, spun him around, and drove him into the nearest wall with enough force to make the whole room shake. "Talk," Kale said, his voice barely above a whisper, "or I start breaking bones." "It was Marin," Torin gasped, his face twisted in pain. "She organized everything, the leaks, the deal with the humans. I just needed the money." Kale's fist connected with Torin's jaw. The crack was audible. "Keep talking." "The exchange is tomorrow night, 3 miles north. She has a map, detailed routes, safe houses, everything." "Where?" "Hidden in her quarters. I swear I don't know exactly where." Kyle released him. Torin collapsed to the floor, gasping. Across the room, Marin was edging toward the window. Her face had gone pale, her composure finally cracking. "You don't understand. The humans are coming anyway. I was trying to save lives." "By selling out your own people?" Kale's voice was flat. "Dead. By putting a price on their heads?" "By being realistic." Marin's voice rose, shrill and desperate. "You can't fight progress. You can't hold back the tide. I was trying to—" "You were trying to profit." Kyle stepped toward her, slow and deliberate. "And you almost succeeded. If it weren't for her—" He turned, and for the first time since he'd burst through the door, his eyes found Leora. She was still on the floor where she'd fallen, her hands pressed against the cold stone, her whole body shaking. The bond was wide open between them. No walls, no defenses, just raw connection. And she could feel everything he felt. Rage, relief, fear that he'd been too late. And beneath it all, that relentless, desperate howl, mine, safe. Thank God she's safe. "Are you hurt?" His voice was different now, quieter, almost gentle. Leora shook her head. She didn't trust herself to speak. Kale held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned back to Marin. "You're going to tell me everything. Every name, every contact, every piece of information you sold. And if you lie to me, if you leave out a single detail, I will make sure you spend the rest of your very short life regretting it." Marin's composure shattered completely. "You can't do this. I'm a council member. I have rights." "You forfeited your rights the moment you committed treason." Kale's eyes blazed gold again. "Guards!" 3 wolves appeared in the doorway, part of Kale's personal escort, their expressions grim. "Take her," Kale said. "And him. Lock them in the holding cells. No visitors. No exceptions." The guards moved quickly, hauling Marin and Torin to their feet. Marin was still protesting, her voice rising to a shriek, but the guards ignored her. Within seconds, they were gone. The stranger, still bleeding from his shoulder wound, groaned weakly. Kale looked down at him with cold indifference. "You too." Another guard appeared, dragging the man out by his good arm. And then, finally, the room was empty. Just Kyle and Leora, standing in the wreckage of a conspiracy that had almost cost her everything. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Leora was still on the floor, her legs refusing to support her weight. Her gift was still wide open, the bond humming between them like a live wire. She could feel his wolf pacing inside his mind, agitated and protective, still not convinced she was safe. Kale crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt in front of her. "You're bleeding." Leora looked down. There was a shallow cut on her forearm. She must have scraped it when she'd thrown herself out of the chair. Blood was seeping through her sleeve, dark and wet. "It's nothing," she said automatically. "Let me see." It wasn't a request. Kale reached for her arm, his touch surprisingly gentle, and pushed back her sleeve. The cut wasn't deep, but it was long and ugly. He pulled a clean cloth from his pocket and pressed it against the wound. "You should have stayed in the archive," he said quietly. "If I had, they'd be gone by now. You could have died." "I almost did." Kale's jaw tightened. His hands were steady, but she could feel the tremor in his wolf, Fury and fear tangled together, barely restrained. What the hell were you thinking, coming here alone? I was thinking someone had to do something. Leora's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. You were all chasing the diversion. No one was watching the settlement. If I'd waited, if I'd tried to find you, it would have been too late. So you walked into a trap by yourself. I didn't know it was a trap. I thought, her voice cracked, I thought I could get proof, evidence you could actually use. At the cost of your own life? My life doesn't matter. The words burst out of her before she could stop them. I'm nothing, remember? The freak nobody wants. The girl everyone wishes would just disappear. If I died, no one would have... Kale's hand shot out, gripping her chin, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were blazing, not with anger, but with something fiercer, something that made her breath catch. Stop, he said, his voice rough. Stop saying that. It's true. It's not. His grip gentled, but he didn't let go. You saved lives tonight, Leora. You uncovered a conspiracy that could have destroyed this entire settlement. You risked everything to do the right thing when everyone else was too blind to see it. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. You matter. You've always mattered. Leora's throat tightened. Tears burned behind her eyes. Stupid, useless tears she'd spent years learning not to shed. You don't know what I am. Then tell me. I can't. Why not? Because you'll hate me. The words came out broken, barely a whisper. Everyone always does. Kale was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he released her chin and sat back on his heels. I know about the bond. Leora's world tilted. I've known since the day I arrived, Kale continued, his voice steady. The moment I walked into that settlement square, my wolf recognized you. And I've been trying to figure out who you were ever since. You... Leora couldn't breathe. You knew? I knew you were my mate. I didn't know who, didn't know your name, your face, your history. His eyes held hers. But I knew you were out there, somewhere, hiding from me. I wasn't hiding from you. I was hiding from everyone. I know. Kyle's expression softened, just slightly. And I need to know why. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading. The choice she'd been avoiding for 6 years. Tell the truth and risk everything, or keep lying and stay safe. Except she wasn't safe anymore. The bond was wide open. Kyle had saved her life, and the walls she'd built to protect herself were already crumbling. Leora took a shaky breath. I can hear things I shouldn't. What kind of things? The truth inside people. She forced herself to meet his eyes. When shifters talk, when they lie, when they hide what they really mean, I hear it. The conversation between human and beast. The voice they keep buried, the desires they won't admit, the fears they won't name. Her hands clenched in her lap. I hear everything. Kale went very still. You can hear my wolf. It wasn't a question. Yes, Leora whispered. What's it saying right now? She wanted to lie, but she was so tired of lying. That I'm yours, that you've been looking for me, that you're terrified something's going to take me away before you can... She stopped, her face burning. Before I can what? Claim me. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Kale's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. And what do you want? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that. What she wanted, what she needed. It had always been about what other people feared, what they demanded, what they expected her to be. I don't know, she admitted. I've spent so long hiding, I forgot how to want anything. Then let me ask a different question. Kale leaned forward, his voice dropping. Are you afraid of me? Leora considered that. She could still feel his wolf in her mind, protective, possessive, desperate. But beneath the animal instinct was something else, something human, something that felt almost like care. No, she said finally. I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of what happens when people find out what I can do. What happened before? They called me cursed, dangerous. My own mother looked at me like I was a monster. Leora's voice went flat. The pack elders decided I was too unstable to train, Too risky to trust. So I learned to bury the gift. And my wolf. Everything that made me different. For 6 years. Yes. That's why you don't shift. If I shift, people will know I lied. And if they know I lied about that, they'll start asking what else I've been hiding. She met his eyes. So I became nothing. Invisible. Safe. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Then he said slowly, "You used the bond to call for help." Leora's stomach dropped. Yes. How? I don't know. I was about to die, and I could feel you out there, and I just screamed. Through the bond? Yes. Have you done that before? Never. I didn't even know I could. Leora's hands were shaking again. I'm sorry. I know it's invasive and wrong, and I shouldn't have. Stop apologizing. Kael's voice was firm. You saved your own life. And mine. Leora blinked. Yours? If you died tonight, his jaw tightened. I would have torn this entire settlement apart looking for whoever was responsible. And I wouldn't have stopped until there was nothing left. He held her gaze. So yes, you saved my life too. Something in Leora's chest cracked open. Not breaking, just softening, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. What happens now? She asked quietly. Kael stood, offering her his hand. Now you tell me everything you know about Marin's plan. Every detail, every name. And we make sure this never happens again. Leora took his hand. His grip was warm, steady, grounding. He pulled her to her feet and didn't let go. And after that? She asked. Kyle's expression was unreadable. After that, we figure out what comes next. Together. Basat. They spent the next 3 hours in Kyle's command room, a converted office in the main hall with maps covering every wall and a table buried under reports and documents. Leora told him everything, the timeline she'd compiled, the patterns she'd found, the connections between council meetings and leaks. Kyle listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he sat back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of his face. Torn's been on the council for 23 years. I know. Marin for 15. Yes. And neither of them showed any signs of disloyalty until now. The timeline suggests otherwise, Leora said carefully. Small things, inconsistencies in reports, information that shouldn't have leaked but did. I think they've been planning this for a long time. Kael's eyes narrowed. How long? At least 2 years, maybe more. And no one noticed. No one was looking. Leora pulled out the timeline, spreading it across the table. Everyone assumed the leaks were accidental, bad luck, human scouts getting lucky. But when you map it out, when you see the pattern, it's deliberate. Kael leaned forward, studying the timeline with sharp focus. They've been bleeding us slowly, weakening our defenses, setting us up for a coordinated takeover. That's my theory. It's a good theory. He looked up at her. How did you figure this out? I'm good with patterns. And I had access to records no one else bothered to read. Because they assumed you didn't matter. Leora's throat tightened. Yes. Kael was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, I'm sorry. She blinked. For what? For not seeing it sooner, for letting people treat you like you were disposable. His eyes held hers. You deserve better than that. Leora didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. A knock on the door interrupted the moment. Captain Reese stepped inside, his expression grim. We've secured Marin's quarters, found the map, along with correspondence, payment records, and a list of contacts in 3 different human settlements. Kyle stood. Show me. Reese laid out the evidence on the table, letters detailing planned attacks, maps marked with targets, receipts for payments received. It was damning, comprehensive. Enough to convict a dozen people. There are more names on this list, Reese said quietly. People we haven't arrested yet. Kael's jaw tightened. How many? 4 confirmed, maybe more. Round them up, now. I want them in custody before dawn. Reese nodded and left. Leora stared at the evidence spread across the table, feeling sick. How many people were willing to sell us out? Enough. Kael's voice was cold, but not anymore. Yeah, The arrests happened fast. Before the sun rose, 6 more conspirators were in custody, including 2 patrol scouts and a supply coordinator. The settlement woke to chaos. Rumors spread like wildfire. Fear and anger rippled through the pack as people realized how close they'd come to annihilation. Kale addressed the pack at noon, standing in the center of the settlement square with the kind of authority that made grown wolves bow their heads. "You've all heard the rumors by now," he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "And most of them are true. Members of your own council conspired to betray you, to sell your lives, your land, your future to the highest bidder. They nearly succeeded." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, angry, afraid. "But they didn't," Kyle continued, "because one person had the courage to look for the truth. One person refused to stay silent when silence would have cost lives." He turned, his eyes finding Leora where she stood at the edge of the crowd. Leora Vance uncovered the conspiracy. She risked her own life to bring evidence to light, and she saved this settlement. Every eye in the square turned toward her. Leora felt her stomach drop. This was the opposite of invisible. This was exposure on a scale she'd never imagined. She wanted to run, wanted to disappear into the trees and never come back. But Kyle was still looking at her, and his wolf was howling in her mind, steady, certain, unwavering. "Don't run. Stand tall. Let them see you." So she did. Leora lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and met the stares head-on. "Some of you fear her," Kyle said, his voice cutting through the whispers. "Some of you have called her cursed, dangerous, unfit to be part of this pack." He paused. "You were wrong. Every single one of you." Silence. "Leora Vance is under my protection," Kyle said flatly. "Anyone who threatens her, insults her, or attempts to drive her away will answer to me personally. Is that understood?" The crowd murmured agreement. No one argued. No one dared. Kyle's eyes swept the square one last time. "We have work to do. The traitors will face justice. The humans will be dealt with. And this pack will survive. Dismissed." The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly. But as they went, Leora caught the looks they threw her way. Not fear this time, something else. Curiosity, respect, maybe even a hint of awe. It felt wrong, uncomfortable, like wearing someone else's skin, but it also felt right. That night, Leora sat alone in the archive, staring at the timeline that had started everything. A knock on the door made her look up. Kale stepped inside, looking tired but satisfied. "Marin and Torin have been formally charged. Trial's set for 2 days from now." "Will they talk?" Marin already has, trying to cut a deal. His expression was grim. "Won't help her. The evidence is overwhelming." Leora nodded. "What happens to the settlement after this?" "We rebuild, strengthen defenses, make sure this never happens again." Kale moved closer, his eyes finding hers. "And we stop letting valuable people hide in the shadows." "I'm not valuable. Stop." Kale's voice was firm. "You've been saying that for years, and I'm done listening to it. You're smart, capable, and you just saved an entire pack. That's valuable. You're valuable." Leora's throat tightened. "I don't know how to be anything other than invisible." "Then learn." Kale stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I'll help you." "Why?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. "Why do you care?" "Because you're my mate," Kyle said simply. "And because even if you weren't, you'd still deserve better than what this pack has given you." Leora looked up at him, at this man who'd saved her life and defended her in front of everyone, and was looking at her now like she mattered. And something inside her, something that had been locked away for 6 years, finally, carefully, began to open. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "The bond, the attention, any of it." "Neither do I," Kyle said. "But we'll figure it out." "Together?" "Together." He offered his hand, and this time when Leora took it, she didn't let go. Outside, the wind howled through the pines. But inside the archive, inside the space where Leora had hidden for so long, something warm and fragile and impossibly hopeful was beginning to grow. For the first time in 6 years, Leora Vance wasn't afraid. She was ready. Ready didn't mean easy. The first test came at dawn, when Leora woke to find half the settlement gathered outside the archive, waiting. She'd fallen asleep at her desk, exhausted from the previous night's revelations and Kael's unexpected gentleness. Now she stood in the doorway, squinting against the early light, and faced a crowd of wolves who'd spent years pretending she didn't exist. "We need to talk," said a woman Leora vaguely recognized. Sarah, maybe. One of the younger patrol scouts. "About what you can do." Leora's stomach dropped. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play stupid." Another voice, male this time. "The king said you uncovered the conspiracy, that you found patterns no one else saw. We want to know how." The crowd pressed closer. Not threatening, just hungry, desperate for answers in the wake of betrayal. Leora's gift stirred, offering her their inner voices, fear, confusion, hope, tangled with suspicion. She shoved it down hard. "I just read the records, cross-referenced dates. Anyone could have done it." "But no one did," Sarah said. "Except you. Because no one else was looking. Or because you can do something we can't." The male wolf stepped forward. His name was Marcus, Leora remembered. A hunter. Young, aggressive, the kind who'd sneered at her in passing for years. "The elders always said you were different, dangerous." Maybe they were right. The crowd murmured agreement, not hostile yet, but close. Leora felt her pulse spike. This was exactly what she'd feared: exposure, followed by fear, followed by violence. She was 2 seconds away from grabbing her emergency pack and running for the mountains when a cold voice cut through the tension. "Step back." Kael appeared from behind the crowd, moving through them like a blade through water. He stopped beside Leora, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Miss Vance doesn't owe you explanations," he said flatly. "She saved your lives. That's all you need to know." Marcus bristled. "With respect, Your Majesty, if she's got some kind of power, then it's hers to share or keep private, not yours to demand." Kael's eyes were cold as winter. "You have 3 seconds to disperse before I start treating this as an attempted intimidation of a witness under royal protection." The crowd scattered. Leora watched them go, her hand shaking, her breath coming too fast. When the last wolf disappeared around the corner, she turned to Kael. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. They're scared. They just want answers. What they want," Kael interrupted, "is someone to blame for their own failure to see the truth. You're an easy target." His jaw tightened. "I won't let them make you one." Leora's throat constricted. "This is going to keep happening. People asking questions, demanding I explain myself. Let them ask. You don't have to answer." "And when they figure it out anyway?" Kael was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, "Do you want to tell them?" "No." "Then don't." "It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple." Kael turned to face her fully. "You spent 6 years hiding because people made you feel like you had to. That stops now. What you are, what you can do, that's yours, no one else's. And if they can't handle that, it's their problem, not yours." Leora stared at him, at this man who'd known her for less than a week, and was already defending her harder than her own family ever had. "You make it sound easy." "It won't be," Kael admitted, "but you're not alone anymore." The bond hummed between them, warm and steady. His wolf was quieter now, still protective, still possessive, but calmer, like it trusted her to stay. Leora took a shaky breath. "What happens at the trial?" "Justice," Kael said simply, "and you're going to help deliver it." The trial was set for noon in the main hall, with every ranking pack member in attendance as witnesses. Leora arrived early, clutching a folder of evidence she'd compiled overnight. Every document, every timeline, every piece of proof that tied Marin and Torin to the conspiracy. Kael had asked her to present it, publicly, in front of the entire pack leadership. The thought made her want to vomit. "You'll do fine," Captain Reese said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one. "Just stick to the facts. Let the evidence speak." Leora wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold on to. "What if they don't believe me?" "They will." Reese's voice was certain. "You've got documentation going back 2 years. Names, dates, payments, it's ironclad. Marin's been on the council for 15 years. People trust her. Trusted, Reese corrected. Past tense. You broke that trust the moment you showed the king what she really was. He paused. People are going to be angry. At her. At themselves for not seeing it, but not at you, not this time. Leora wanted to believe him, but years of experience had taught her otherwise. The hall filled quickly. Council members took their seats at the front. Pack members lined the walls. And at the center of it all, bound in silver chains and flanked by guards, sat Councillor Marin and Elder Torin. Marin looked defiant. Torin looked broken. Kael entered last, his presence commanding immediate silence. He took a seat at the head of the council table and gestured to Leora. Present your findings. Leora stood. Her legs felt like water. Every eye in the room turned toward her, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt like that terrified 13-year-old girl standing before the elders, being told she was too dangerous to train. Then Kael's voice echoed in her mind, not through the bond, but through memory. You're not alone anymore. Leora opened the folder and began to speak. 2 years ago, human settlements along the eastern border began expanding at an unprecedented rate. At the time, we attributed this to natural population growth. But when cross-referenced with our internal communications, a different pattern emerges. She pulled out the first document, a patrol report dated 18 months prior. This report details a shift in our northern patrol schedule. It was discussed in a closed council session on March 14th. 3 days later, a human logging operation broke ground half a mile from the exact route we'd abandoned. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Leora continued, her voice growing steadier with each word. 4 months later, we relocated a supply cache from the western ridge to a new location. The decision was made in another closed session. Within a week, human hunters were spotted near the old cache site, with a map showing its exact coordinates. She laid out document after document, building the case piece by piece, each leak tied directly to council meetings, each compromise linked to Marin or Torin or both. The room grew quieter as she spoke. Hostile stares shifted to something else. Shock, maybe. Or shame. These wolves had trusted their leaders blindly, and now they were seeing the cost of that trust. The pattern becomes even clearer when we examine communication logs, Leora said, pulling out another set of papers. Councillor Marin made 17 trips to the border settlements in the last year. Each trip was logged as routine inspection, but correspondence seized from her quarters tells a different story. She read from one of the letters, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Quote, "The next shipment of information will be ready by month's end. Ensure payment is delivered to the usual location. Our agreement remains mutually beneficial." End quote. Dated 6 weeks ago. Signed with Marin's personal seal. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. Marin's face had gone pale. Leora raised her voice over the noise. Elder Torin's involvement follows a similar pattern, though his motivation appears different. Bank records show multiple large withdrawals, all sent to a private medical facility treating his daughter's illness. The timing of these withdrawals coincides directly with intelligence leaks about patrol schedules and safe house locations. Torin's head dropped. His shoulders shook. "The final piece of evidence," Leora said, her voice hard now, "is this." She pulled out a leather-bound ledger, Marin's personal accounts, seized from her quarters. Payment records, $50,000 received over the last 18 months from 3 separate human contacts. The dates align perfectly with major intelligence leaks. The money was deposited into accounts under false names, then transferred in smaller amounts to avoid detection. She set the ledger on the table with a heavy thud. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a mistake. This was calculated, systematic betrayal carried out over years, and it nearly cost us everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Kael's eyes swept the crowd, cold and merciless. Then he turned to Marin. "Do you deny these charges?" Marin's composure had cracked completely. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild. "You don't understand. The humans were coming anyway. I was trying to save lives. By selling them out? By being realistic," Marin's voice rose to a shriek. "You can't fight progress. You can't hold back civilization. I was trying to position us to survive the inevitable. By betraying your own people for money. Kale's voice was flat. Is that your defense? Marin's mouth opened, closed. No words came out. Kale turned to Torin. And you? The old wolf looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. I needed the money. My daughter, she's sick. Human doctors, human medicine, it's expensive. I thought, his voice broke. I thought I could help her, and no one would get hurt. How many got hurt because of your maps? Kyle asked quietly. How many patrols walked into ambushes because you sold their routes? How many died? Torin's face crumpled. 3. 3 wolves died because of information I gave them. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know people would die. Ignorance isn't innocence. Kyle stood, his presence overwhelming. You both made a choice, a deliberate choice to value personal gain over pack survival, and now you'll face the consequences. He turned to the assembled council members. Under territorial law, the penalty for treason is death or permanent exile. The choice belongs to the pack. His eyes swept the room. What say you? The vote was quick, unanimous. Exile. Marin screamed. Torin wept. The guards dragged them both from the hall, their protests echoing long after they disappeared. When silence finally fell, Kyle turned back to Leora. His expression was unreadable, but through the bond she felt his wolf's fierce pride. Well done. Leora's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the folder, but she'd done it, presented the evidence, held her ground, proven she was more than the invisible archivist everyone dismissed. The pack members were staring at her differently now, not with fear, with something closer to respect. It felt strange, foreign, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, but it also felt like victory. What? The aftermath was messy and complicated and exhausting. Marin and Torin were stripped of their ranks and escorted to the border under armed guard. Their co-conspirators, the scouts and supply coordinator, received lesser sentences but were permanently barred from positions of authority. And the pack, reeling from the revelation that their own leaders had betrayed them, struggled to rebuild trust. Leora found herself at the center of it all. People who'd ignored her for years suddenly wanted to talk, to ask questions, to understand how she'd seen what they'd missed. She deflected most of it, gave vague answers about pattern recognition and archival work, but the attention was relentless. She was reorganizing supply manifests 2 days after the trial when Sarah appeared in the archive doorway, looking hesitant. Got a minute? The young scout asked. Leora gestured to a chair. Sure. Sarah sat fidgeting with the edge of her jacket. I wanted to apologize. For the other morning, the crowd outside your door, we shouldn't have done that. You were scared, Leora said. It's understandable. Scared, yeah, but also stupid. Sarah met her eyes. You saved us. All of us. And instead of saying thank you, we acted like you owed us something. She shook her head. That was wrong. Leora didn't know what to say. Apologies weren't something she was used to receiving. The thing is, Sarah continued, a lot of us younger wolves, we never really bought into the whole Leora's cursed thing. We just went along with it because everyone else did. But watching you stand up there at the trial, laying out evidence like you'd been doing this your whole life, she smiled. That was incredible. You were incredible. Leora's throat tightened. I was terrified. Couldn't tell. You looked completely calm. Sarah leaned forward. Look, I know you probably want everyone to just leave you alone, but if you ever need help with the archive or whatever project the King's got you working on, I'm offering. No strings, just, I want to help. It was such a simple offer, but coming from someone who'd spent years pretending Leora didn't exist, it felt monumental. Thank you, Leora said quietly. I'll keep that in mind. Sarah stood, looking relieved. Good. And hey, some of us are going on a run tonight. Moon's almost full. If you want to join... She trailed off, leaving the invitation hanging. Leora's wolf stirred, interested. 6 years without running in a pack. 6 years of solitude. Maybe, Leora said. I'll think about it. Sarah grinned. Good enough. After she left, Leora sat in the quiet archive, staring at the dusty shelves, and realized something had shifted. Not just in how people saw her, but in how she saw herself. She wasn't the broken girl hiding from judgment anymore. She was becoming something else, something stronger. 3 days after the trial, Leora retreated to the archive seeking peace and found Captain Reese waiting instead. "They're calling you the wolf who sees," he said without preamble. Leora groaned. "Please tell me that's not actually catching on." "It's already caught." Reese leaned against her desk, arms crossed. "You're famous, Vance. Better get used to it." "I don't want to be famous. I want to be left alone. Should have thought of that before you saved everyone's lives." Reese's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, you earned it. The respect, the recognition, all of it." "It doesn't feel earned. It feels like," Leora struggled for words, "like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." "You're not pretending. You're just finally letting people see who you actually are." Reese pushed off the desk. "The king wants to see you, by the way. Command room. Soon as you're available." Leora's stomach flipped. "Did he say why?" "Nope. Just said it was important." Reese headed for the door, then paused. "Hey, Vance, whatever he asks, whatever he offers, don't sell yourself short. You're worth more than you think." He left before she could respond. Kyle was bent over a map when Leora entered the command room, his expression focused and intense. He looked up as she closed the door, and something in his eyes softened. "You've been avoiding me." It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. "I've been busy," Leora said, which was true. She'd spent the last 3 days reorganizing the archive, updating security protocols, and trying very hard not to think about the bond humming constantly in the back of her mind. "Too busy for this?" Kale gestured to the map spread across the table. Leora moved closer. It was a detailed territorial map, marked with red circles indicating human settlements and blue lines showing pack borders. But there were new markings now, green stars scattered across the northern region. "What are these?" she asked. "Potential alliance points." Kale's finger traced one of the stars. "Smaller packs? Independent settlements. Groups that have been struggling against human expansion but lack the resources to fight back." He looked at her. "I'm proposing a coalition." Leora blinked. "That's ambitious." "It's necessary. The humans aren't going to stop pushing, and isolated packs can't hold them back alone." Kale's jaw tightened. "But a unified front, coordinated defenses, shared intelligence, combined resources, that might actually work." "It's never been done before." "Because no one's ever had a reason to try." Kale's eyes met hers. "Until now." Leora studied the map, her mind already working through logistics. "You'd need a central hub, somewhere to coordinate communications, track movements, store records." She stopped. "You want me to run it?" "I want you to help build it," Kyle corrected. "You've proven you can see patterns others miss, organize information others overlook. That's exactly what this coalition needs." "I'm an archivist, not a strategist." "You're whatever you choose to be." Kale moved around the table, closing the distance between them. "The question is, what do you choose?" Leora looked up at him, at this man who'd defended her, protected her, seen her when no one else had. His wolf was steady in her mind, patient, hopeful, waiting for her answer. "I choose to help," she said quietly. "But I have conditions." Kyle's eyebrows rose. "Name them." "I work alone. No assistants, no oversight committees, no council members breathing down my neck." "Agreed." "I have full access to all territorial records, no restrictions. Done." "And," Leora took a breath, "I want to train, combat training, properly. No more pretending I can't fight." Kale's expression shifted, surprise mixed with something that looked almost like pride. "You want to shift?" "I want to stop hiding." Leora's hands clenched at her sides. "I've spent 6 years pretending to be weak. That ends now. It'll raise questions. People will want to know why you lied." "Let them ask. I don't have to answer." Leora met his eyes steadily. "You said that, remember?" Kale's smile was small but genuine. "I did." He held out his hand. "Deal?" Leora took it. His grip was warm, solid, grounding. "Deal." The bond flared between them, bright and fierce and undeniable. Kael's wolf surged forward in her mind, triumphant and possessive, howling with joy. Yes, finally. Mine. Ours. Ours. But Kael's expression remained controlled, even as his thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture that was almost tender. Training starts tomorrow, he said. Dawn. Don't be late. Dawn came too early and too cold. Leora stood in the center of the training grounds, a cleared space behind the main hall where patrol teams ran drills, and watched Kael strip off his jacket with economical efficiency. First rule, he said, your wolf is not your enemy. Stop treating it like one. Leora's stomach churned. I haven't shifted in 6 years. I don't even know if I remember how. Your body remembers, your wolf remembers. Kael moved closer. The question is whether you trust them enough to let go. What if I can't? You can. You're just scared. His eyes held hers. And that's fine. Fear doesn't make you weak, it makes you smart. But hiding from it makes you trapped. Leora wanted to argue, but he was right. She'd spent so long running from her own power that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be whole. Close your eyes, Kael said quietly. Leora obeyed. Feel your wolf. Don't push it down. Don't lock it away. Just feel it. Leora took a shaky breath and lowered her mental walls, just slightly, just enough. Her wolf stirred immediately, restless and eager after years of forced dormancy. It pressed against her consciousness, not aggressive, but desperate. Let me out. Please, let me run. It wants freedom, Leora whispered. Then give it. What if? No, what ifs? Just trust. Kael's voice was closer now. I've got you. You won't hurt anyone. You won't lose control. I promise. Leora opened her eyes. Kael stood an arm's length away, his expression intense and focused. And behind him, watching from the edge of the training ground, stood Captain Reese and 3 other guards, backup, in case something went wrong. The sight should have terrified her. Instead, it felt safe. Leora closed her eyes again and let go. The shift happened faster than she remembered, bones realigning, muscles reforming, senses sharpening until the world exploded into color and scent and sound. She hit the ground on 4 paws, her wolf surging forward with 6 years of pent-up energy, and it felt like coming home. Leora threw her head back and howled, long and loud and fierce, not a cry for help, a declaration, an announcement. I'm here. I'm alive. I'm done hiding. When she finally lowered her head, panting, she found Kael watching her with something that looked almost like awe. Beautiful, he said quietly. Leora's wolf preened. Then, because 6 years of dormancy had left it playful and reckless, it lunged at him. Kael shifted mid-step, smooth and effortless, his wolf massive and midnight black. He met her charge with a playful shoulder check that sent her tumbling. Leora recovered, circled, and pounced again. They played like puppies, wrestling, chasing, testing each other's speed and strength. And for the first time in years, Leora felt free. When they finally shifted back, both breathing hard, covered in dirt, Kael was grinning. Actually grinning, an expression Leora had never seen on his usually stoic face. Your wolf is fast, he said. Your wolf is a show-off, Leora shot back. Kael laughed, a real, genuine laugh that made something in Leora's chest warm. From the edge of the training grounds, Reese called out, Guess she remembers how to shift after all. Leora flushed. Half the patrol team had gathered to watch, their expressions ranging from impressed to bewildered. Spread the word, Kael said, his voice carrying. Leora Vance is under my personal training. Anyone who has a problem with that answers to me. No one argued. The training became routine over the following weeks. Every dawn, Leora met Kael in the training grounds. They ran drills, combat forms, defensive maneuvers, predator evasion techniques. Kael was a brutal teacher, pushing her hard, never letting her slack. But he was also patient, explaining when she struggled, adjusting techniques when something didn't work. And slowly, carefully, Leora began to trust her wolf again. The pack's reaction was mixed. Some wolves were supportive. Sarah, the young patrol scout, started joining the training sessions, asking Leora for tips on tracking. Marcus, the hunter who'd confronted her that first morning, actually apologized, mumbling something about jumping to conclusions. A few others nodded respectfully when she passed. But there were still plenty who looked at her with suspicion, who whispered when they thought she couldn't hear, who saw her sudden ability to shift as proof she'd been lying all along. Leora tried not to care, tried to focus on the work, building the Coalition Intelligence Network, organizing records, training her body back into fighting shape. But the whispers still hurt. She was cataloging Border Patrol reports one afternoon when Kael appeared in the archive doorway, looking unusually tense. "We have visitors," he said without preamble. "Representatives from the Greystone Pack. They're asking for you specifically." Leora's pulse quickened. "Why?" "Because word spread about what you did here. How you uncovered this conspiracy." Kael's expression was hard to read. "They think they have a similar problem, and they want your help finding it." Leora set down the report she'd been reading. I don't even know where to start with something like that." "You start the same way you did here. Look at the patterns. Follow the evidence." Kael moved into the room, closing the door behind him. "But you need to know, if you agree to this, you're not just helping one pack. You're setting a precedent. Other packs will come asking for the same thing. This coalition I'm building, it's going to need someone who can do what you do, someone who can see the threats others miss." "You want me to be some kind of, what? Investigator?" "I want you to be whatever you're capable of being." Kael stopped in front of her desk. "But I need to know you're ready for this. Because once you say yes, there's no going back to invisible." Leora thought about the girl she'd been 6 years ago, terrified, broken, convinced the only way to survive was to disappear. Then she thought about the woman she was becoming, stronger, braver, finally learning what it felt like to matter. "I'm ready," she said. Kael's wolf sang triumph in her mind. "Then let's go meet them." The Greystone delegation waited in the council chambers. 3 wolves who radiated the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting a losing battle for too long. Alpha Cain was a broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much. His mate, Sarah, was lean and sharp-featured, with the alertness of someone who'd learned to trust no one. And their scout, Micah, looked young, maybe early 20s, but carried himself with the wariness of a survivor. "Miss Vance," Cain stood as she entered, offering his hand. "Thank you for seeing us." Leora shook it, studying him carefully. Through her gift, which she kept tightly controlled, she could feel the edges of his desperation. This wasn't a casual request. This was a last resort. "Tell me what's happening," she said. Cain gestured for everyone to sit. "Over the last 8 months, we've had 7 major intelligence leaks. Patrol routes compromised. Supply locations discovered. 2 of our safe houses burned to the ground. Thankfully empty at the time, but only because we got lucky." "Casualties?" Kael asked. 5 dead, 12 injured, and the humans keep pushing closer." Sarah's voice was tight. "We've tried everything, changed our protocols, rotated personnel, restricted access to sensitive information. Nothing works. The leaks keep happening." Leora pulled out a notebook. "Who has access to the information that's being leaked?" "Council members, senior patrol leaders, supply coordinators." Micah counted off on his fingers. "Maybe 20 wolves total." "Any patterns? Times of day? Specific types of information?" The 3 Greystone wolves exchanged glances. "We hadn't thought to track it that way," Cain admitted. "That's where we start." Leora looked at Kael. "I'll need to visit their territory, review their records, interview their people." "How long?" Sarah asked. "Depends on how organized your archives are. Could be a week, could be a month." Leora met her eyes. "But I'll find your traitor, or traitors, however many there are." Relief flooded their faces. Cain's shoulders sagged like he'd been holding up a building and finally got permission to set it down. "Thank you. Truly, our pack is dying. If this continues much longer—" "It won't," Kael said with absolute certainty. "Miss Vance will find who's responsible, and then we'll deal with them." The meeting continued for another hour, hammering out logistics and timelines. Leora would travel to Greystone territory in 3 days, accompanied by a small security detail. She'd have full access to their records, and complete authority to question anyone she deemed necessary. When the Greystone delegation finally left, looking more hopeful than they had when they'd arrived, Kale turned to Leora. "You're sure about this?" "No," Leora admitted, "but I'm going to do it anyway." Kale's expression softened. "You know this is going to change everything. Once word gets out that you're helping other packs, that you can find traitors, expose conspiracies, you'll never have privacy again." "I know." Leora looked down at her hands. "But what's the alternative? Let other packs fall? Let more wolves die because I was too scared to step up?" "There's no shame in choosing safety. There's no honor in it either." Leora met his eyes. "You asked me what I choose to be. This is my answer. I choose to matter, to make a difference, to be someone worth remembering." Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the distance between them and did something completely unexpected. He pulled her into his arms. Leora froze, startled. Kale had maintained careful distance since the bond had opened. Respectful, protective, but never intimate. This was different. This was, "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, his voice rough against her hair. "More than you know." The bond flared between them, warm and fierce. His wolf was howling, not with possession or demand, but with something gentler, something that felt almost like love. Leora's breath caught. She stood stiff and uncertain in his embrace, not sure what to do with her hands, with the warmth spreading through her chest, with the sudden overwhelming realization that this man, this king, cared about her, really cared, not because of the bond or duty or political advantage, just because. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I," Kale admitted. "But we'll figure it out, together." He released her slowly, stepping back, his expression carefully neutral again. But his wolf was still singing in her mind, and Leora knew, with absolute certainty, that something fundamental had shifted between them. They weren't just allies anymore, weren't just packmates or potential mates circling each other warily. They were becoming something real. 2 weeks later, Leora stood in the center of the main hall before the largest gathering the Northern Ridge had ever hosted. Representatives from 7 different packs filled the space: alphas, betas, council members, scouts. The coalition Kyle had proposed was becoming reality, and Leora was about to play a crucial role in making it work. Kale stood at the head of the assembly, his presence commanding absolute attention. "We've all faced the same threats: human expansion, intelligence leaks, betrayal from within." His eyes swept the crowd. "Separately, we're vulnerable. Together, we're unstoppable. This coalition isn't just about survival. It's about building something stronger than what we had before." He gestured to Leora. "Miss Vance has agreed to serve as the coalition's intelligence coordinator. She'll work with each pack to identify security weaknesses, root out traitors, and build defensive networks that actually work. Some of you have already requested her assistance. Others will follow. But understand this: she has my complete authority and my full protection. Anyone who interferes with her work answers to me personally." The assembled wolves murmured agreement. Some looked skeptical. Others looked desperate. But none argued. Leora stepped forward, her heart pounding. 6 years ago, she couldn't have imagined standing before this many people. Now she met their stares head on. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "This work won't be easy. Finding traitors means questioning people you trust, examining records you thought were secure, accepting that sometimes the threat comes from inside, not outside." She paused. "But if we don't do this, if we don't root out the rot, we'll keep bleeding until there's nothing left." "How do we know we can trust you?" someone called from the back. Leora had been expecting that question. "You don't. Not yet. But you can look at what I did here, the conspiracy I uncovered, the lives I saved, and you can decide whether you're willing to take a chance." She held the speaker's gaze. "Because the alternative is doing nothing and hoping for the best. And hope's not a strategy." Silence. Then Alpha Kane stood, his voice carrying. "The Greystone Pack trusts her. She's already started work in our territory, and what she's found in just 1 week." He shook his head. "We should have asked for help months ago." Another Alpha rose, a woman Leora didn't recognize. "Ironwood Pack supports the coalition, and we formally request Miss Vance's assistance. We've had similar problems, similar losses. One by one, the representatives stood, pledging support, requesting help, committing to the coalition. By the time the meeting adjourned, Leora had 7 packs on her schedule and a responsibility so massive it should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Purpose. That night, Leora stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching the full moon rise over the ridge. Footsteps approached from behind. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. The bond told her everything. "You did well today," Kael said, stopping beside her. "I'm not sure I'm ready for all this." "No one ever is." Kael was quiet for a moment. "But you'll rise to it. You always do." Leora looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd saved her life, defended her honor, believed in her when no one else had. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why do you have so much faith in me?" Kael's expression softened. "Because I see you. Not the girl everyone dismissed, not the ghost hiding in the shadows. I see who you really are." He reached out, his hand finding hers. "And she's extraordinary." The bond flared between them, bright and undeniable. And for the first time, Leora didn't fight it, didn't push it away or bury it beneath walls in fear. She let it be. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know. But I'm not running." "I know that too." Kael's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "And that's what makes you strong." They stood together in the moonlight, 2 wolves learning how to be more than their past, and for the first time in her life, Leora Vance felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The girl who'd spent 6 years invisible was finally, undeniably, impossibly seen. And she was just getting started. Getting started turned out to be the easiest part. The hard part was everything that came after. Leora spent the next month traveling between pack territories, sleeping in unfamiliar beds, eating meals with wolves who looked at her like she might be their salvation or their doom. The Greystone investigation took 2 weeks and ended with the arrest of their supply coordinator, a bitter old wolf who'd been selling information to pay gambling debts. Ironwood took longer. 3 weeks of combing through records before Leora found the pattern. A young scout feeding patrol routes to a human settlement in exchange for medicine his brother needed. Every territory had its own tragedy, its own betrayal born from desperation or greed or misguided love. And every time Leora uncovered the truth, she felt the weight of it settle deeper into her bones. She was back at the Northern Ridge, compiling reports in the archive, when Captain Reese found her slumped over her desk at 2 a.m. "You look like hell," he said, setting down a cup of coffee beside her elbow. "Feel like it too." Leora straightened, wincing as her spine cracked. "What are you doing up?" "Patrol shift just ended. Saw your light on." Reese pulled up a chair, studying her with concern. "You've been gone more than you've been here lately. When's the last time you slept?" Leora tried to remember. Failed. "Does passing out at your desk count?" "No." Reese's voice was firm. "You're burning out, Vance. I've seen it happen to good wolves. You keep pushing like this, you're going to break." "I'm fine." "You're not." Reese leaned forward. "Look, I get it. 7 packs counting on you, lives depending on your work. But you're not going to help anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." Leora knew he was right. But the alternative, slowing down, taking breaks, felt impossible when wolves were dying because of traitors she hadn't found yet. "I can't stop," she said quietly. "Not when there's still so much to do." "Then at least take tomorrow off. 1 day. Sleep late. Eat a real meal. Remember what it feels like to be human." Reese stood. "King's orders, by the way. He's worried about you too." Leora's chest tightened. "He said that?" "Didn't have to. It's written all over his face every time you leave for another territory." Reese headed for the door, then paused. "You matter to him, Vance, more than you probably realize. Don't make him watch you destroy yourself." He left before she could respond. Leora sat in the quiet archive, surrounded by evidence of betrayal and corruption, and realized Reese was right. She was running herself into the ground. And for what? To prove she was useful? To make sure no one could call her worthless again? Or because somewhere along the way, she'd started believing that her value depended on how much she could give? The bond stirred in her mind, Kael's wolf, distant but present, always watching. She could feel his concern like a physical touch, could sense him fighting the urge to come find her, to drag her away from work and force her to rest. Leora closed her laptop, gathered her notes, and made a decision. Tomorrow, she'd take the day off, rest, recover. But tonight, she had one more thing to finish. She found Kyle in his private quarters, a suite of rooms in the main hall that he'd claimed as temporary headquarters. He opened the door before she could knock, his expression shifting from surprise to concern in an instant. "It's 2:30 in the morning," he said. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I just—" Leora hesitated. "Can I come in?" Kale stepped aside without a word. His quarters were sparse, maps on the walls, tactical gear stacked in the corner, a desk buried under paperwork. But there was also a fireplace with actual flames crackling, a worn leather couch that looked comfortable, and bookshelves lined with volumes that had nothing to do with warfare or politics. Leora had never been in here before. It felt intimate, personal. "Reese came to see me," she said, standing awkwardly in the center of the room. "Told me to take tomorrow off, said it was your order." "It is." Kyle moved to the fireplace, adding another log. "You've been running yourself ragged for weeks. Someone needed to intervene." "I'm fine." "You're not." Kyle turned to face her, his expression hard. "You're exhausted, stressed, and you're trying to carry the weight of 7 packs on your shoulders like you're the only one who can." "I am the only one who can," Leora shot back. "You said it yourself. I see patterns others miss. Without me, without you, we'd find another way." Kale's voice softened. "But I'd rather not have to. Which means you need to stop treating yourself like you're expendable." The words hit harder than they should have. Leora felt her throat tighten, her carefully constructed composure cracking. "I don't know how to do that." "Then learn." Kale closed the distance between them. "You're not the invisible archivist anymore, Leora. You're the wolf who sees. The woman who saved the Northern Ridge, the person 7 packs are counting on." He paused. "And you're my mate, which means your well-being matters to me. More than you can possibly understand." The bond flared between them, fierce and undeniable. Leora could feel his wolf pacing in his mind, agitated and protective, demanding he take better care of what was his. "I'm scared," Leora admitted, "that if I stop, if I slow down, people will realize I'm not actually special, that I just got lucky, that I'm still the same broken girl everyone dismissed." "You were never broken," Kyle said firmly. "You were surviving in a world that tried to destroy you. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." Kale reached out, his hand cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "And I need you to believe that, because I can't watch you burn yourself out trying to prove something that's already been proven." Leora closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. The bond hummed between them, warm and steady, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself feel it fully, let herself draw strength from it instead of fighting it. "Stay," Kyle said quietly. "Just for tonight. Rest here. Let me take care of you for once." It was such a simple request, but it felt monumental. Leora opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "Okay." Relief flooded his features. Kyle guided her to the couch, settled a blanket around her shoulders, and sat beside her close enough that their knees touched. The fire crackled. The bond hummed. And slowly, carefully, Leora let herself relax. She fell asleep with her head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist, and for the first time in a month, she slept without nightmares. What? Morning came with sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee. Leora sat up, disoriented, and found Kyle at his desk already dressed and working. He looked up as she stirred, a slight smile crossing his face. "Coffee's on the table. Breakfast will be here in 10 minutes. Leora blinked. "You ordered breakfast?" "You're taking the day off. That includes cooking." Kale set down his pen. "How do you feel?" "Like I actually slept." Leora stretched, feeling muscles she'd forgotten she had. "Thank you. For last night." "Don't thank me. Just do it more often." Kale's expression turned serious. "I mean it, Leora. You can't keep running yourself into the ground. The coalition needs you functional, not dead on your feet." "I know." Leora pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I'll try to do better. Good. A knock on the door interrupted them. Kael called, "Come in." A young Omega entered carrying a tray loaded with food, eggs, bacon, fresh bread, fruit. She set it on the table, nodded respectfully, and left without a word. Leora stared at the spread. "This is too much." "You haven't been eating properly. Humor me." Kael poured her coffee, added cream without asking how she liked it, which meant he'd been paying attention, and handed her the cup. "Eat. Then we'll talk about what comes next." They ate in comfortable silence. The food was good, better than anything Leora had bothered to make for herself in weeks. And sitting here, in Kael's private space, sharing a meal like this was normal, felt right. When they finished, Kael pushed his plate aside and pulled out a folder. "I received word from the Silverwood Pack yesterday. They want to join the coalition, but they're also requesting your help. They've had incidents, small things, but consistent. Supplies going missing, patrol schedules getting disrupted. They think someone's sabotaging them from inside." Leora's investigator instincts kicked in immediately. "How long has it been happening?" 6 months, maybe longer." Kael slid the folder across. "They're the 8th pack to request your assistance, and there are 3 more waiting in line." 8 packs, with 3 more coming. Leora did the math and felt her stomach drop. "At this rate, I'll be traveling for the next year straight. Which brings me to my next point." Kael leaned back in his chair. "You need help. Assistance. People you can train to do what you do. I work alone. You worked alone because you had to, because no one else could see what you see." Kael's voice was patient but firm. "But you can teach them. Show them how to spot patterns, read between lines, connect dots others miss. You're not just an investigator, Leora. You're a teacher, and the coalition needs both." Leora wanted to argue, but he was right. She couldn't investigate 11 packs by herself. The work would kill her long before she finished. "Who would I even train?" she asked. "Sarah, for one. She's been asking about your methods for weeks. There are others, young wolves with sharp minds who need direction." Kael paused. "And there's someone else I want you to meet." He stood, moving to the door. A moment later, a woman entered, maybe 30, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Leora Vance, meet Elena Torres. She used to run intelligence for the Western Territories before their coalition collapsed." Kael gestured for Elena to sit. "She's been looking for work. I thought you two should talk." Elena extended her hand. "I've heard a lot about you. The Wolf Who Sees, pretty impressive title." Leora shook it, studying her carefully. Through her gift, which she kept controlled but alert, she could sense Elena's sharp focus, her analytical mind, her bone-deep exhaustion that came from fighting losing battles. "I didn't choose the title," Leora said. "No one ever does." Elena's smile was wry. "But you earned it. Word travels fast in our world. What you did here, what you're doing for the other packs, that's the kind of work I used to do, before everything fell apart." "What happened?" Leora asked. Elena's expression darkened. "Same thing that almost happened here. Traitors, corruption, leaders more interested in profit than protection. By the time I figured out who was responsible, half our territories were gone and the other half didn't trust anyone." She met Leora's eyes. "I left because staying meant watching it all burn, but I'd like another chance, to build something that actually works." Leora glanced at Kael. He was watching her with that patient, assessing look he got when he wanted her to make her own decision. "What makes you think you can do this work?" Leora asked Elena. "Because I've failed at it before, and failure's the best teacher there is." Elena leaned forward. "Look, I'm not trying to replace you or take over, but you need help, real help. Someone who understands intelligence networks and investigation protocols. Someone who can handle the territories you don't have time for." She paused. "Let me prove myself. Give me one case. If I screw it up, I walk. If I succeed, we talk about making this permanent." Leora studied her for a long moment. Then she pulled out the Silverwood folder and slid it across. 6 months of sabotage. No clear pattern. No obvious suspect. Find the person responsible and I'll consider bringing you on. Elena's eyes lit up. "Deal." After she left, Leora turned to Kael. "You planned this." I facilitated a meeting between 2 people who need each other," Kael corrected. What happens next is up to you. What if she can't do it? What if she misses something crucial? Then you'll catch it when you review her work. Kale moved closer. You're not giving up control, Leora. You're building a team. There's a difference. Leora wanted to argue, but the truth was she was drowning in work. And if Elena was even half as good as she claimed, having her on board would change everything. Fine, Leora said, but I review everything, and if I don't like how she works, then you fire her. Your call. Kyle smiled. See? Delegation isn't so bad. Tja. Elena proved herself within 2 weeks. She traveled to Silverwood territory, spent 4 days reviewing records and interviewing pack members, and returned with a detailed report identifying the saboteur, a supply coordinator's assistant who'd been stealing resources to support a secret relationship with a wolf from a rival pack. The evidence was solid. The analysis was sharp. And the presentation was professional enough that Leora couldn't find a single flaw. Impressive, Leora admitted, reviewing the report in the archive. You work fast. I work efficiently, Elena corrected. There's a difference. She leaned against the desk. So? Do I pass? Leora studied her for a long moment. Then she pulled out a stack of folders, 3 more packs requesting assistance. These are yours. Same deal. Find the problems, document everything. Report back to me before taking action. Elena grinned. Understood. Anything else? Yeah. Leora met her eyes. Welcome to the team. With Elena handling 3 investigations and Sarah training as an analyst, Leora finally had room to breathe. She took on the complex cases, the ones with multiple suspects or intricate conspiracies. She refined her methods, documenting techniques that others could learn, and slowly, carefully, she built something that looked almost like a real intelligence network. The coalition grew stronger. Pack by pack, territory by territory, wolves who'd been fighting alone started working together. Shared resources, coordinated defenses, built trust that had been shattered by years of betrayal. And at the center of it all was Leora Vance, the woman who'd started as nothing and become indispensable. The recognition came in waves. First, it was grateful alphas thanking her personally. Then it was younger wolves asking to train under her. Then it was other territories, ones not even in the coalition, requesting her help. By the 3rd month, Leora's reputation had spread beyond the northern territories entirely. She was sitting in the archive reviewing Elena's latest report when Kyle entered with news that made her stomach flip. The Southern Council wants to meet with you, he said without preamble. They've heard about the coalition's success, about your work. They want to discuss expansion. Leora set down the report. Expansion? Bringing the Southern packs into the coalition, creating a unified network across both territories. Kael's expression was carefully neutral. It's unprecedented, historic, and it all hinges on whether you're willing to take on more packs. How many more? 15, maybe 20. Leora's breath caught. 20 packs. Hundreds of wolves. Territories spanning thousands of miles. It was massive, impossible, completely overwhelming. I can't. You can, Kael interrupted gently. With the team you've built. With Elena and Sarah and the others you're training. You've proven you can do this, Leora. The question is whether you want to. Leora stood, moving to the window. Outside, wolves were going about their daily routines, patrol shifts changing, supply deliveries arriving, training sessions starting. Normal life. Made possible because someone had rooted out the threats trying to destroy it. She'd done that, not alone, but she'd started it. If I say yes, Leora said quietly, everything changes. Again. It does. Kael moved to stand beside her. But you've already changed everything. This is just the next step. What if I fail? Then you'll try again, like you always do. Kael's hand found hers. I have faith in you, even when you don't have it in yourself. The bond hummed between them, steady, certain, unshakable. Leora took a breath. Tell the Southern Council I'll meet with them, but I have conditions. Kael's smile was small but proud. I'd expect nothing less. The meeting with the Southern Council happened 2 weeks later in neutral territory. a clearing halfway between northern and southern lands, guarded by wolves from both sides. Leora arrived with Kael, Elena, and a security detail. The Southern Council came with twice as many people and enough political posturing to fill a stadium. Alpha Dominic Crane led the Southern delegation, a man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that assessed everything like he was calculating its worth. Beside him sat 3 other alphas and a handful of advisors, all watching Leora with varying degrees of skepticism. "Miss Vance," Dominic's voice was smooth, practiced. "We've heard impressive things about your work. The conspiracy you uncovered, the traitors you've rooted out. Very impressive indeed." "Thank you," Leora said carefully. "The question is whether you can do it on a larger scale." Dominic leaned forward. "The Southern Territories have different challenges. More pacts, more politics, more complications. We need someone who can handle that level of complexity." "I can," Leora said, "but I'll need full cooperation, access to all records, authority to question anyone, and immunity from political interference." One of the advisors, a thin woman with sharp features, laughed. "You can't be serious. You expect us to give a northern wolf unrestricted access to our territories?" "I expect you to decide whether you want my help or not," Leora said flatly, "because those are my terms. Take them or leave them." Silence fell. Dominic studied her with new interest. "You're confident. I like that. But confidence without results is just arrogance." "Then let me prove it." Leora pulled out a folder, one she'd prepared specifically for this meeting. "I've been reviewing reports from your territories. There's a pattern, small things. Supplies going missing, communications getting intercepted, information leaking at suspicious times." She slid the folder across. "You have a coordination problem. Multiple small betrayals across different packs, all happening simultaneously, which suggests someone's organizing it." Dominic opened the folder, his expression darkening as he read. "How did you—" "I'm good at patterns," Leora said simply. "And whoever's running this operation made a mistake. They got greedy. The thefts increased in frequency over the last 3 months. The leaks got more specific. They're building towards something big." "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet, but if you want me to find out, you'll agree to my terms." Dominic exchanged glances with his fellow alphas. Then he looked at Kael. "You trust her judgment?" "Completely," Kael said without hesitation. "And you'll guarantee her safety in our territories?" "I'll guarantee more than that. Anyone who interferes with her work will be considered an enemy of the entire coalition, Northern and Southern territories both." Kael's voice was hard. "She has my protection, absolute and unconditional." More silence. Then Dominic smiled. A real smile this time, not political. "Then we have a deal. Welcome to the Southern Territories, Miss Vance. Don't disappoint us." The Southern expansion changed everything. Suddenly, Leora was coordinating investigations across 40 territories, training a team of 15 analysts and investigators, building intelligence networks that spanned entire regions. The work was massive, complex, exhausting, and absolutely exhilarating. She found traitors in places no one expected, uncovered conspiracies that ran deeper than anyone imagined, dismantled corruption that had been festering for decades, and with every success, her reputation grew. The Wolf Who Sees became a name whispered with respect and fear across both territories. Wolves who'd never met her knew her work. Young investigators studied her methods. Traitors learned to fear the moment she turned her attention their way. 6 months after the Southern expansion, Leora stood before the largest coalition gathering in history, representatives from 63 packs, all assembled to formalize what they'd built together. Kael stood at the front of the assembly, his presence commanding absolute attention. But when he spoke, his eyes found Leora in the crowd. "We've accomplished something unprecedented," he said. "Built something that will outlast all of us. A coalition based not on fear or force, but on trust and mutual protection." He gestured to Leora. "None of this would have been possible without the woman who saw what we couldn't. Who had the courage to expose the truth when silence would have been easier? Miss Vance, would you join me?" Leora's heart hammered as she moved through the crowd. 63 packs. Hundreds of wolves, all watching her. She reached the front and stood beside Kyle, feeling small and exposed and terrified. 6 months ago, Kyle continued, most of you didn't know Leora Vance existed. Those who did dismissed her, underestimated her, called her worthless. His voice hardened. You were wrong, every single one of you. He turned to face her fully. You saved my territory. You saved dozens of others. You built an intelligence network that protects thousands of wolves. You did what everyone said was impossible. He paused. And you deserve to be recognized for it. Kyle pulled out a silver medallion, the Coalition's mark, given only to wolves who'd contributed something extraordinary to their survival. On behalf of every pack in this coalition, he said formally, I name you Leora Vance, First Warden of the Coalition, Protector of Truth, Guardian of the Pack Bond, and my chosen mate. The last words sent a shock through the crowd. Gasps rippled across the assembly, but Kyle didn't waver. He fastened the medallion around Leora's neck, his fingers brushing her skin in a gesture that was both formal and intimate. Then he stepped back, giving her space to respond. Leora looked out at the sea of faces. Wolves who'd feared her, dismissed her, underestimated her. Wolves who now looked at her with respect and awe and something close to admiration. I'm not a hero, she said, her voice carrying across the silent assembly. I'm just someone who refused to stay invisible, who chose to fight when fighting seemed impossible, who believed that truth mattered more than safety. She touched the medallion. You don't need to be special to make a difference. You just need to care enough to try. The applause started slowly, then built, then became a roar that shook the very ground. And Leora Vance, the girl who'd spent 6 years hiding, finally, completely let herself be seen. The celebration lasted long into the night, but Leora slipped away early, seeking quiet. She found it in the same place she always did. The training grounds, empty now, bathed in moonlight. She shifted without thinking, her wolf surging forward eagerly, and then she ran. Not away from something, toward it. She ran through the forest, her paws eating up ground, her senses alive with scent and sound and freedom. 6 years she'd kept this part of herself locked away. 6 years of hiding, surviving, pretending to be less than she was. Never again. She threw her head back and howled, not in pain or fear, but in pure, undiluted joy. Another howl answered, deep, powerful, familiar. Kyle's wolf appeared from the trees, massive and midnight black, his eyes glowing gold in the darkness. He moved toward her, not aggressive, but purposeful, and Leora's wolf responded with eager playfulness. They ran together, chasing, wrestling, playing like the matched pair they were. And when they finally shifted back, breathless and covered in dirt, Kyle was grinning. You're happy, he said. I am, Leora admitted. For the first time in, I don't even know how long. Good. Kale pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. You deserve to be happy. The bond flared between them, bright and fierce and undeniable. And this time, Leora didn't fight it. She kissed him. It was clumsy at first. Neither of them had much practice with intimacy. But it was also perfect, real. A promise of something they were both still learning how to build. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kyle rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said quietly. I think I have since the moment you threw yourself out of that chair to escape a knife. Reckless, brave, completely terrifying. Leora laughed, a real laugh, full of joy and disbelief. I love you too, even though you're bossy and overprotective and you ordered me to take a day off like I'm a child. You needed it. I did, Leora admitted, just like I needed you. To see me, to believe in me, to remind me I was worth fighting for. You've always been worth fighting for, Kyle said. You just needed to believe it yourself. They stood together in the moonlight, two wolves who'd found each other against impossible odds, and for the first time in her life, Leora felt complete. Not because she'd proven herself to others, not because she'd earned respect or recognition or titles, but because she'd finally learned to see herself the way Kyle saw her, as strong, capable, extraordinary, as enough. 3 months later, Leora stood at the edge of the northern ridge, watching the sun rise over territory she'd helped protect. The coalition was thriving, 63 packs working together, sharing resources, protecting each other. The intelligence network she'd built was identifying threats before they became crises. Young wolves were training under her methods, learning to see what others missed. And beside her, wearing a matching medallion and a small smile, stood Kyle Draven, her mate, her partner, her king. "Ready?" he asked. Leora looked at the forest stretching endlessly before them. Somewhere out there, more packs needed help. More traitors needed exposing. More wolves needed someone who could see the truth they'd been blind to. "Always," she said. They shifted together and ran, not away from the past, but toward the future they were building together. And behind them, carved into the stone archive where Leora had spent 6 years invisible, someone had etched new words. Here worked the wolf who sees. The woman who saved us all. Leora Vance had stopped hiding, and in doing so, she'd become unstoppable. The girl who'd heard too much had learned to speak. The woman who'd been dismissed had proven them all wrong. And the alpha no one saw coming had risen to claim her place, not through force or birthright, but through courage, truth, and the unshakable belief that even the smallest wolf could change everything. She ran under the open sky, finally free, finally whole, finally exactly who she was always meant to be. And she never looked back.